Hi, I'm Purple Rain, coach of the Baltimore Buzzwoles in the VBL-S, and this is my review for my Season 9 draft. This will be the first ever draft that I've ever been a part of, and I'm really excited to use this as a sort of time capsule for my initial thoughts going into a draft league, what I value in Pokemon, how I thought about when drafting, and this will also be to look at the strengths and weaknesses of all of my Pokemon individually that I've gotten, and then how I think the overall team will function. Um, when I first knew I was going to be in the draft, I had one Pokemon in mind that I thought was the strongest in the format and that I knew I wanted. Um, I ended up being the fourth overall pick, so I knew there was a chance I would get it. I still didn't think it was likely because it would have been my first overall choice, but I did end up getting it, and I'm happy to say that because my Pokemon is Fluttermane. Fluttermane has pretty much everything I could ever want in a Pokemon. Insane damage with Moonblast, Dazzling Gleam, Shadow Ball, all fantastic stab moves, and a spread move in Dazzling Gleam that's just perfect to have. Energy Ball, Mystical Fire, Thunderbolt, Power Gem, Psyshock, all really good coverage. Again, just amazing, especially when you consider the stats of Fluttermane. Insane special attack stat, insane speed stat. So you're pretty much always hitting things first, and you're always hitting them hard. Uh, the insane special defense stat is also fantastic because it just means you get to live a lot of hits that such a fast Pokemon generally doesn't get to. Um, Also, but beyond that, Fluttermane doesn't just have really hard hitting moves. Fluttermane also has insane utility. Icy Wind is fantastic for controlling the game. Taunt against slower either setup or just a Pokemon that or a supporting Mon is amazing, especially because it isn't Prankster, so you can taunt dark type Pokemon really quickly. Um, yeah, it's perfect. Um, Charm is I only think I'd ever use it into a Dondozo matchup. I would be really surprised if I thought Charm would be valuable in pretty much any other situation. Uh, and then the other thing that Fluttermane has that I think is the most valuable part of it is Imprison and Trick Room. Uh, it is so fast, and so it's really surprising uh, for it to have Trick Room on a team. But it can totally run it. It's totally viable to be a surprise Trick Room user. And also, under Trick Room, it still poses a threat even though it's slow because it can reverse the Trick Room potentially. Uh, so it just is. It's a really, really good Pokemon to have. I think I could not be happier with my first choice. Um, but truth be told, the other big reason I wanted it was because of the last utility move on this page, Perish Song. I was really interested in making a Perish Trap team for my first draft league. Um, Unfortunately, that didn't happen because a couple picks after that, I picked Fluttermane. Gothitelle was taken, and so I ended up pivoting. But Perish Song is still a super cool move. I could see myself using it, and again, if it was against Dondozo or in a couple of other situations, I could where I could end up trapping. But anyways, I think just Fluttermane has tons of utility, can be used totally different ways. Very interesting. Now, I'm going to be going over a couple of Fluttermane's potential sets. The sets I bring up here are just sets I think I can end up bringing multiple times a season, something that looks roughly like this. The first one is pretty standard. Dazzling Gleam, Shadow Ball, and then Icy Wind for speed control. Focus Sash just so it doesn't get one shot, because it could totally get one shot, especially by a physical attacking move. Yeah, I think that this is the most standard set that a Fluttermane can run. Modest or timid, but doesn't really. It depends on matchup mostly. Uh, then there's choice specs Fluttermane. If it needs specs to get the one hit KOs, I could totally see myself running specs quite a few times throughout the season. Um, Icy Wind would again just be like if for speed control, Dazzling Gleam Shadow Ball, you could replace Moonblast for Dazzling Gleam if you wanted, and then Power Gem is just a coverage move. So whatever coverage move would work best into the upcoming matchup is what I would run. And then Flutter Mane, the last set is just an Imprison Trick Room set with Protect and Shadow Ball just to do a lot of damage because you still want to be doing damage uh, even if I have Imprison and Trick Room, right? Um, so yeah, these are all Flutter Mane sets I could see myself running. Just into different matchups, different situations. And I think it shows a little bit of the flexibility here with this Pokemon. Yeah. My second pick in the draft, uh, as I said before, I was interested in making a Perish Trap team. Unfortunately, once that plan fell through, I decided to full pivot and go to just do another hard hitting attacker for my second pick, Hydreigon. Uh, it has fantastic stab moves in Dark Pulse and Draco Meteor. They're going to hit like a truck because Hydreigon has a really good special attack stat. Also, pretty good coverage. Earth Power, Fire Blast, or Flamethrower, Focus Blast, Flash Cannon, Hydro Pump. All of them can hit a bunch of different Pokemon. Uh, really valuable to have. Um, has some fantastic utility, specifically in Tailwind. Uh, Tailwind is it's more speed control, always good to have. Another taunt Pokemon that isn't Prankster, and also what's really good about it is that it's Dark type, so it can't be taunted by a Prankster taunt, right? So it can pretty much always get that taunt off. Thunderwave for more speed control. Snarl is a fantastic move that I could totally see myself running. But one of the big reasons for picking it up was it had pretty good defensive synergy with Flutter Mane, even though they're both relatively squishy Pokemon. Not Hydreigon, not nearly as squishy as Flutter Mane. But what I mean by that is Hydreigon can switch into the Ghost type moves that are going to hit Flutter Mane really hard. And Flutter Mane can switch in to the super effective Dragon type moves that would be hitting Hydreigon. Uh, so I thought there was a pretty good core there of offensive Pokemon that still can each take a hit for the other. Uh, and they're both super fast. Or Hydreigon's not super fast, but it's pretty fast, and Flutter Mane's super fast. And given that Hydreigon gives Tailwind support, it makes a lot of things super fast. So I just thought that that would be a really good double core to have to start. These are the three most common Hydreigon sets I think I'd use. Roselli Berry, if I knew I could live a fairy type hit even after Roselli Berry for using it, I could justify it then. I don't. It's not supposed to be Dragon Dance. It's supposed to be Draco Meteor for the top move. But otherwise, Dark Pulse, Protect, and Tailwind are all uh, really valuable moves. You just getting the stab, super hard hitting moves out, and Tailwind. Assault Vest. This would be for it's really used against Indeedee Armarouge on ladder or was. Uh, but I could just see it into any really hard special attack hitting team, uh, where I would just use it as a check to that assault vest snarl until they're no longer threats, and then just can throw out Draco Meteors or Dark Pulses. You could replace Heat Wave as a coverage move. Could also replace it with U-turn to have it be more of a pivot. That's probably what I'd end up doing, honestly. And then there's finally the Scope Lens Hydreigon set. It's just so you can always crit Draco Meteor after a focus energy. It's going to do tons of damage. The only thing it wouldn't be able to hit is fairy types, but if there's a fairy type, I probably just wouldn't run this set. And if there's enough fairy types, I wouldn't bring Hydreigon because that's suicidal. Uh, but yeah, these are all three different ways I think it could be used relatively well. Uh, yeah, it just depends on the situation, but all of them are viable, and it's part of why I picked him, is because I thought he had a bunch of different ways that were usable. My third pick in the draft was Azumarill. Now, it might be a little confusing that I picked Azumarill because it's another fairy type and I already have one. But I figured with Hydreigon, more fairy types is always good, so I can switch into dragon moves and be fine. And also, I really wanted a water type, and I wanted one strong and early. Uh, I also needed a physical attacker since I had two special attackers already, and I didn't want to just be super weak to Snarls and Assault Vest all the time. And because I think most of the time Hydreigon is not going to be setting up, and Fluttermane should almost never be setting up, I wanted a Pokemon that could pose real threat if you were to leave them on the field and let them have a turn to just set up. And the perfect Pokemon for that is Azumarill because it has Belly Drum, and if you let and Huge Power. So if you let Azumarill not stay alive for a little bit too long and don't damage it, then despite its 50 attack stat, Huge Power and Belly Drum will just destroy you. So I thought it would just be a really good Pokemon to have considering all of that. It also has priority with Aqua Jet, which is something I was missing, and I wanted. Ice Spinner I thought would be good in case there were any terrains that I need to remove. But it also just has super hard hitting Liquidation and Play Rough. It has some more coverage. I'll doubt a little bit that I'm going to be using it because I think Azumarill is pretty straightforward in how you use it. Again, it has a ton of utility moves. I could see it using Bulldoze, maybe Icy Wind, Charm. Actually, there is some merit. There's more merit to on Azumarill than Fluttermane because it's bulkier. But yeah, for the most part, I think it's pretty obvious what Azumarill is going to do. There are three sets that I picked out. Choice Band is just to hit things as hard as you can with either Priority Aqua Jet, Liquidation, Play Rough, or a coverage. I chose Ice Spinner to show it off, but yeah, it's just going to hit things incredibly hard. Citrus Berry, Belly Drum. You just again do a ton. And then two moves, Aqua Jet and Play Rough probably, so you have one of each of its stabs and a priority move. And then there's Assault Vest. The Assault Vest variant, I don't know actually if I'd use this that much. Against a super heavy special attacking group I could, or against a team where the only answer to Azumarill would be a special attacking Pokemon. Then I could see it. But for the most part, I think the first two sets are really what I'll be using week in, week out. Again, like things will change based on matchup. Won't always look like this, but these seem to be where Azumarill is strongest. Oh, and one thing I don't think I mentioned for why I picked Azumarill is despite having two fairies now, they don't share any weaknesses. Since Fluttermane's two weaknesses are Steel and Ghost, and Azumarill's two weaknesses are Poison, or three weaknesses are Poison, Electric, and Grass. Because I mean, I guess I could run Sap Sipper every once in a while, but that's I guess against a really grass heavy team or against where the only answer would be a grass type Pokemon. Sure, I'd run Sap Sipper. But for the most part, it'll be Huge Power, so it'll have three weaknesses. Anyways, this left me in a position where I needed to decide on my fourth Pokemon. And what I ended up doing was picking Donphan. Now, this might be a little strange because Donphan was not the highest point Pokemon left on the board. It was actually pretty low. But I thought it was of great value generally. And I also realized that ground types were going off the board pretty quickly. At this point, I think most ground types that I wanted were gone. Donphan was available. It had a really good attack stat, and I knew I wanted to spam Earthquake on the team. I have already picked up a Levitate Pokemon in Hydreigon, And so I knew that if I was able to get one or even two more ground type immunities and Dawnfan, I'd be able to spam Earthquakes, and that would help me a lot with a lot of teams because a lot of teams just cannot deal with Earthquake over and over and over again. um, so yeah, that's what Dawnfan's main job will be on this team because it does have a ton of coverage too, which is good, and it has a couple utility moves in Bulldoze that I could definitely use, or Rock Tomb. The rest are bad because it's too slow to really use them, and I don't think I'd ever set up on Dawnfan except maybe for an Iron Defense body press set. But yeah, it's really just an Earthquake bot. I wanted to hit Earthquake next to Hydreigon, uh, and that's what it's going to do. And it's going to take a lot of KOs that way, hopefully. Yeah, these are the two sets I made. You'll notice Dawnfan only has two sets as opposed to three that others have, because I feel like unless I'm building something specifically for a matchup, there are two really obvious ways that it will be used, and it won't really be used any other way. Again, unless I'm building it against something that's like hyper specific for a matchup. But I don't know that yet because these are just general ways I think I'll be building the Pokemon. But yeah, they're both just main job is to hit Earthquake. One's going to hit harder, one is going to survive special attacks harder. Uh, and then one has. They should really both have Ice Shard just because it's priority. But, anyways, this is. The main job is to hit Earthquake. That's what I want Donphan to do. And then it has a couple of other things it can do, like Rock Slide or a coverage move or Iron Head. But yeah, or Bulldoze for speed control. But like this is what it's doing. It's hitting Earthquake. The opponent knows it's hitting Earthquake. I know it's hitting Earthquake. The question is, can they do anything about it? Because it should hopefully hurt them a lot. Speaking of Earthquake spam, I then picked up Orthworm. There were two reasons I picked up Orthworm. Like I said, Earthquake spam, really good. Well, there are three reasons. Earthquake spam is really good. It gives me another way to do it. I needed a steel type, and steel types are not super abundant in this generation. And it also let me have the move Shed Tail, which I thought would be perfect given I have Azumarill as a mon that can really use help in setting up. I can just Shed Tail to Azumarill, click Belly Drum, and then hopefully they'll probably not be able to KO me, and then maybe I can just Aqua Jet a couple times and knock them out with Azumarill. But Orthworm has a couple of damaging moves. What it's mainly going to be doing is either Iron Defense, body pressing, Earthquaking, or something like that, or Heavy Slam and Iron Heading. That is pretty much what it does. It's used to check fairy types for the most part. Yeah, and occasionally when there's a good matchup for it, Iron Defense, Body Press seems like it'll be useful. But again, where it really shines is in Shed Tail. Shed Tail, I think, is super valuable for the team. It has a couple of speed control moves in Bulldoze and Rock Tomb. And then every once, like very rarely, I could see it using Wrap. Wrap would be maybe if I wanted to have a Perish Trap set, like a pseudo Perish Trap set, and I knew they could not kill Orthworm, I could Wrap and Perish Song with either Azumarill or with Fluttermane, and then try to ruin their day. These are a couple of sets I could see myself using. A very standard Citrus Berry, Shed Tail, Protect, Heavy Slam, Body Press set. Heavy Slam to deal with fairies, Body Press to deal with rocks or rock types or steel types or whatever. Assault Vest set, this would be if they have like really no answer into Orthworm. Because I think Orthworm is positioned in a very unique way in that most people want to have an answer to every type. But Orthworm kind of changes things because most people who think they have a steel type answer and their ground type now might not if they don't have a good enough fire type or fighting type. to check Orthworm, it might just be able to run over the game. And so I could see an Assault Vest set doing well there. And then it would be there to just run over everything while not being killable. And then there's the Iron Defense Body Press set with Heavy Slam as well. This would be if the other team only has its only checks for Orthworm are physical attackers. I could just Iron Defense Body Press, try to win the game that way. I think it could definitely work. I think Shed Tail could definitely work. I think the Assault Vest set is a little more sketchy. I'm not sure if it'll actually ever happen this season, but if it does, I think if it does, then the situation's perfect for it, and it could totally run over a game. My next pick was really interesting because I wanted Fake Out. And I wanted Trick Room. I wanted a real Trick Room user. Hopefully one that had different weaknesses to Fluttermane. So I knew I didn't want it to be weak to either Ghost or Steel. And there was one really solid Trick Room user left out that I saw, and that was Indeed Email. Or one solid Trick Room user that did not have those weaknesses and in fact had an immunity to Ghost, and that's Indeed Email. Indeed Email has its most important thing for my team is that it's Trick Room and Prison, which means I can threaten Trick Room with my Pokemon. I can imprison Trick Room if I think that the opponent just loses to me if they can't get Trick Room up. And then it also has Fake Out support. So it can help me get Azumarill set up too. Maybe I will use Substitute Fluttermane, could do the crit Hydreigon build, and then Fake Out helps me there. Basically, Fake Out's great, and I wanted to Fake Out, and it is a Fake Out. It also has a relatively good special attack stat, so I really value the moves it has then, too. Hyper Voice and Psychic or Psyshock, really good. Shadow Ball, good coverage. Stored Power, probably not useful, but maybe. And then Energy Ball, Draining Kiss, and Dazzling Gleam, all good coverage to have. There's also Trick, which is good into opposing Trick Room matchups, potentially. If I were to run Trick, Choice Scarf, I could then trick the Choice Scarf onto the Trick Room Pokemon, and I'm really set, right? After you, I don't think I'll ever be using, but I guess there's some situations where or I have a couple slow Pokemon like Dawnfan. I could speed it up with Indeedee. And then there's Encore, which is a really, really valuable move. It stops opponents from clicking Protect in front of me, especially because it's not the slowest Pokemon in the world. And if it's under Tailwind from Hydreigon, then I am really happy to be able to just click Encore all the time. So those are the ways I think it's going to be used. But it has a couple sets. Life Orb set just for hitting things hard with Psychic, Hyper Voice, and then a coverage move. I could see myself running pretty much a total support set with Fake Out and Encore. This would probably be if the team has Tailwind and another setup Mon. And it can run a variety of different items. Life Orb, Colbur, Focus Sash, Psychic Seed with the Psychic Surge. But yeah, and it can also imprison Trick Room, like I said before. Imprison Trick Room is really valuable. And so I was really happy to be able to get Indeedee when I did. My next Pokemon, Pikachu. Now, looking at Pikachu's stats, it looks bad. And its stats are bad for the most part. But what you have to consider is it has the option to hold two items. Eviolite, which would make its defenses a lot better. Not that it would make them good because your HP is still 35 and your defenses are still pretty low. But it's a usable item, I would say. And it also has Light Ball, which is the unique item to Pikachu, which doubles his attacking stats. So that makes it really good, or not a really good attacker, but a usable attacker. And one of the reasons I wanted Pikachu for a variety of reasons. First of all, I had no answer to water types yet. And given Donphan is not like the center of my strategy, but it does seem to be really useful with the team I'm starting to build, I wanted to be able to hit waters in some way. And also, it was another fake out. So all of those setups that I've told you before with Indeedee also works with Pikachu. Pikachu can just be the fake out Pokemon this time. It's fast enough that Encore is usable. And then it had one other thing that I really wanted, which was Light Screen and Reflect. Um, so now I have the ability to set up screens with this team. It's not the best screen setter because it has bad stats, and if I'm using Light Clay, then I'm not using Light Ball or Eviolite or Focus Sash to try to keep it alive or let it do damage. But it's usable. It's kind of the problem with Pikachu is it's really flexible, but it seems like it's kind of bad at everything. That being said, it still has some more value with Nuzzle, which is a great move. Speed control on a specific Pokemon, pretty much guaranteed unless they switch into a ground type or Terra Ground or something. Yeah, but there's a couple sets that I thought Pikachu could use. Light Clay with Fake Out, Light Screen, Reflect, Nuzzle. That is a pretty much full support set. Just use it to probably Fake Out, then use one or two of those moves and die. Light Ball would be if the opponent has a bunch of waters that I needed to deal with, or even one or two waters where the only check would be Pikachu. I would bring a Light Ball Pikachu, probably. Try to kill it that way. And then there is an Eviolite Pikachu, which I have a special attack, a bunch of special attacking moves on. Maybe I would run Nasty Plot or Agility or something with it. In reality, I think that's pretty unlikely. I just wanted to show that it doesn't just have physical attacking moves, it has special attacking moves. Again, if you remember, its stats could be doubled. And so maybe I would end up running a mixed Pikachu set because its stats are so close, right? So I could run Light Ball, mixed stats, Eviolite, Light Clay. It has a bunch of different things it can do. And the one move I don't have on here, or the one item I don't have on these sets is Focus Sash. And I think I'll probably run Focus Sash on Pikachu a lot because it's really squishy, but it does have a bunch of really good supporting moves and supporting options. And so I was really happy to get Pikachu on the team. My next pick was Crocolore. Now, Crocolore is really interesting because it is very bulky if you look at its stats, or relatively bulky. It becomes very bulky when you give it Eviolite. And so then Crocolore is a just straight up defensive fire type Pokemon. It has a couple fire type moves. It's really only coverage is Hyper Voice, which it probably is not going to use because it's a normal type move, and there's very little reason to run normal type coverage. It technically has setup and curse, but that's boosting your attack, and you never want to boost your attack. It would just be good to basically lower speed and up defense for if it was in Trick Room. It could be useful, I guess. Encore could be useful in Trick Room. Slack Off is perfect because it's recovery. Will-O-Wisp, Yawn, all very good moves. Fire Spin is another trapping move, and Snarl is good as well. But basically, its function is to be a defensive fire type because I needed a fire type. There weren't a ton left on the board, and my points were running out. And I knew I wanted a relatively big hitter later, and so I decided to pick up Crocolore while it was still available. And these are some of the sets that it got me that I thought I could use with it. Really, the top one is what I'd be using. Will-O-Wisp, Snarl, Flamethrower, or another fire move, depending on what I need, and Slack Off. Slack Off is just really good recovery, Snarl, damage control, Will-O-Wisp, damage control, Flamethrower, damage. Basically, maybe in the end game, they won't have an answer to this, and I'll be able to slowly kill their Pokemon uh, by slacking off, and then whenever I have a chance, flamethrowering uh, after getting their damage low enough with Snarl and Will-O-Wisp. There's also this weird set I thought about, which is like a yawn fire spin set. So fire spin keeps them in, then you're able to yawn them so they go to sleep. And maybe you could perish song with the fire spin with one of my other Pokemon. And then you have Will-O-Wisp for damage control. Could replace it with Snarl. Will-O-Wisp is probably better though in most situations. And then slack off for recovery so you're able to survive while you're busy fire spinning and yawning and Will-O-Wisping. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that it's probably not going to be used that way ever on the team, but it's not impossible. And it's just not the most flexible Pokemon. It's a defensive fire type. Then this is the big hitter that I wanted, Drifblim. So I had thought about picking up Hawlucha earlier to pair with my Indeedee male, but I didn't really want it that much. And so after I picked up Indeedee male, Hawlucha went off the board. And I thought, well, that's too bad. But I got over it quickly when I saw that Drifblim was still on the board. Because Drifblim gave me a couple of things Hawlucha didn't, and it was still really valuable for it was just really good to have. Drifblim is an Unburden Pokemon, and by the way, the reason I'm comparing the two is they're both Unburden Pokemon, and so their main function on this team would be to have Psychic Seed. They lose the Psychic Seed when they go out to the Psychic Train that Indeedee sets up, and then it's super fast. With Hawlucha, that would be mainly an offensive threat. With Drifblim, it's mainly a utility threat because it has tons of utility moves. So many. Tailwind is fantastic. Will-O-Wisp is great. Imprison for Trick Room. Hypnosis if I want to be horrible and just use Hypnosis. Icy Wind for more speed control. Haze could be useful. Disable could be really good if they're not able to take care of something after I disable. Clear Smog, again, for another setup Pokemon, could totally see it. And then it has a bunch of attacking moves that are usable in some situations. Acrobatics, obviously, really good, considering it's losing its item. Maybe worth investing into attack over a special attack for that, especially when you consider Explosion exists. And I have another Ghost type, so I could theoretically explode next to Fluttermane. But then there's also Hex, which is really good, considering I have Thunder Wave and Will-O-Wisp. Air Slash is good to have. Psychic is good coverage. Shadow Ball is good stab move. Thunderbolt's is more good coverage. Its setup is interesting. Stockpile I looked at. Minimize. I mean, I hope I'm not ever using that, but I guess I might. And Calm Mind are all interesting moves because it's got such a high HP stat. I guess I could see myself setting up with Drifblim in the right situation, but that's not its main function. Its main function is definitely to be paired with Indeedee and be a fast, really, really fast Tailwind. Speaking of, here are the sets that I came up with. Tailwind, then Disable and Icy Wind, and Protect with a Psychic Seed, so it gets on the field, and then it just does all the speed control and disables problematic moves against me. The one on the bottom is an Imprison Trick Room set because it also does have Imprison and Trick Room. What's good about Drifblim and Indeedee Male is that they have entirely different defensive weaknesses. So they can both. So each week, one might have Imprison Trick Room or the other, and they could both be on the team because they also pair together really well. And the opponent won't know which one. And so they won't know which one they have to burst down quickly. So I think that's really valuable to have. Then there's also the weird Flare Boost Flame Orb set. If I really need a special attacker that has stab flying moves, I guess I can use Drifblim too. It's a good mix-up to have in my back pocket. But again, its main function is pretty obvious. It is a tailwinder. It is a speed controller when really fast, or a stopper of Trick Room. That's what it's mainly here to do. I also got a Phalanx. Phalanx is interesting. If you've been paying attention to the Pokemon I have gotten so far, you'll have noticed I'm really pretty weak to two types, Dark and Rock. The type that's really good against that is Fighting. I didn't have a ton of points left, and so I ended up picking Phalanx. It has a ton of Fighting type moves. Very little coverage is the biggest problem with it. And its stats, it's got okay attack, okay defense, pretty bad everything else. Its speed is middling, which is, it's bad to have middling speed too. But it has tons of setup. Agility, bulk up, iron defense, swords dance, trail blaze. Oh, and then its signature move, no retreat. All really good setup. But it doesn't do much unless it's hitting super effectively with its and because it doesn't have much coverage, it's not going to be able to do that often. It's a highly matchup dependent Pokemon, but it's a matchup dependent Pokemon that I need support in the matchup in, and so that's why I ended up taking it. These are the sets. You may have noticed that special defense is really weak, so slapping an assault vest on there just makes the most sense. It just lets it do things, lets it survive hopefully more than one turn. Focus Sash is another way to do that. A similar thing. You can maybe throw no retreat onto it, and probably protect instead of one of the coverage moves I put on there, but I was just showing off coverage, the little bit of coverage it does have. But yeah, Focus Sash with a setup move, and then 2 attacking moves and protect. And then the last set I thought of was an Iron Defense Body Press set. I really like Iron Defense Body Press. I don't think it's going to ever be used on Phalanx. Its defense isn't that high. But yeah, it's usable, I guess, in the very specific situation where they have all physical attackers, pretty much, and Phalanx is really good into them. The other thing it does provide, though, Phalanx provides, is Defiant. So it helps against the Intimidate matchup a bit, which is just always good to have, especially given I have a Pokemon like Azumarill. I would love to have something to support it against Intimidate, and that is also Phalanx's job. Now, the last Pokemon in the draft was Venonat. Well, my last Pokemon in the draft. I don't think it has any usable damage moves. Like, it does, but its attack and special attack stat are so bad that I would never use them. Again, and for that same reason, no reason to ever even consider setting up on it. It's just a Venonat. But it does have something I needed, which was Rage Powder. Redirection is super valuable. It'll let me get set up with Azumarill, with Hydreigon. I guess if I'm setting up with Fluttermane or putting Fluttermane behind a substitute, or using Orthworm's Shed Tail, super valuable to have. And then it also has almost 100% accurate Sleep Powder because it has Compound Eyes. Yeah, so that's what it does. These are 2 supportive sets. It'll pretty much always be running Focus Sash, maybe an Eviolite, probably not though, probably just Focus Sash, with Rage Powder, Sleep Powder, and then 2 other moves. Toxic Spikes would be into like Dondozo. That's pretty much it. Otherwise, it's just going to be like Struggle Bug or Acid Spray and Sleep Powder. Acid Spray's actually got a good amount of use because I've got so many strong special attackers. But yeah, that is pretty much what Venonat does. It's just very supportive, useful to have for Rage Powder and Sleep Powder. But that's all it is, really, is a Rage and Sleep Powder bot. And that was the last Pokemon in the draft that I got. So this is my draft. And so now I have to answer the question how the team functions. First thing that comes to mind when I see the team is Earthquake spam. I want to use Earthquake with Donphan next to Hydreigon, next to Orthworm, or next to Driftblim. There are 3 immunities on my team to ground. One of them actually heals. Uh, and Donphan has a really good attack stat, and so just hitting Earthquake over and over and over is really good. It will kill things. Um, the other option I have is using my Fake Out Pokemon and Orthworm with Shed Tail to help set up. The setup Pokemon on my team probably just be mostly Azumarill and Hydreigon. So they have the setup moves in Nasty Plot and Belly Drum that are really valuable. Although Phalanx also has enough setup moves that it could totally uh, get support from Orthworm and be usable. There's also the Indeedee Driftblim mode, and Fluttermane is just like one of the strongest like wall breakers in the game. It will hit things very very hard very often. It does not set up, but it can help facilitate an Azumarill sweep or a Hydreigon sweep, or it can totally sweep on its own. But it doesn't set up in the same way. Its main job is to just break through all the things. And this is my team's type chart and its stat distribution. So this is where I'm going to be talking about like my main ideas coming into the draft and going through it. I really wanted to have a good type chart because I thought that for the draft, coming into it, I was really interested in trying to find all the super valuable Pokemon at lower points. That's actually initially how I found Crocolore, but either way, I was looking at low point Pokemon and being like, what here seems undervalued? And then I thought more, and I realized I am in no way qualified to judge what is undervalued and overvalued. I don't have any experience in Draft League. What I do have some experience playing VGC, but I wouldn't say I'm that good. And given that this is a draft league, I figured the people who played Draft League a lot and helped create this document where for every describing point value to every Pokemon probably know a bit more than me right now. What I do know is important though is to be able to have a good balanced team. And so I wanted a balanced type chart without too many glaring weaknesses, and I wanted to be able to function in a variety of different modes. And I think I was overall pretty successful with that. I don't think I'm too weak to any one type. Obviously, there are a couple types where I'm not the strongest against it. Like I would say water's a little bit tough for me. Rock types are a little tough for me. And ice types can be, but I have some answers to ice types. That being said, though, overall, I think I did a good job with typing. Like, I think I've got good defensive switch-ins to most types, if not all types. And I think I can hit most types, if not all types, pretty well. I also think I've got a pretty good speed distribution. Fluttermane obviously is insanely fast, but there's also Driftblim, and Driftblim has Tailwind. And considering its effective speed stat is like 160, considering it has Unburden, yeah, I am totally fine with that. With my fast mode, especially considering I have a couple pretty fast mons over there too. As for Trick Room, I'm less confident in it because 50 speed is not the fastest, and or not the slowest, and 49 isn't the slowest. And Venonat's good under Trick Room, but I'm not sure if I'm bringing Venonat that often. But I still think I have a viable enough Trick Room mode that it's threatening, and I'm willing to go into Trick Room enough that I think people will have to respect it. And I also have Imprisoned Trick Room, so in the matchups where I clearly lose a Trick Room battle, I have two Imprisoned Trick Room Pokemon, both of which can be on the field at the same time, and my opponent has to take a 50-50 on which one they think it is, at least in game one. So I actually think that overall, my draft is pretty good. I don't want to. I don't want to be too certain about that because I could end up just losing first 4 weeks and have to make a couple of transactions. But I'm at least initially happy with how this turned out. So yeah, this has been my draft analysis of what I've done, why I did it, and I'm feeling overall pretty confident and very excited to go into my first season of the VBL-S. Thank you for watching.